Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is June 16th, and today we're going to talk about a really interesting kind of bird. Now, I personally love birds. I'm not a birder. I'm not a bird watcher, but I really love a lot of bird pictures and stories about birds online. So anything about birds, and you've got my interest.
Boy, I cannot say anything more than that because I completely agree.
Really?
Yes,
Really?
I 100% agree. I'm not a bird watcher, but there's not a moment where if I have a few minutes of free time and I hear a bird, I'll just stop and listen. I'll try to see him. But if the bird notices me and feels nervous, I will look away and just kind of casually pretend I'm doing nothing. But really, I'm just listening and enjoying whatever song it may be. It may be a very pretty song. It may be some dissonant sound.
Mm-hmm.
But I will just enjoy a bird for what it is. And today is probably not one of the most beloved birds of all time, but I like them. Listen, we're talking about seagulls, the coastal birds full of surprises, and I'm here to defend them today.
And those are the birds that really make you feel you're by water.
Yeah, they really do. In fact, while I was preparing for this article, I was just thinking about the mental imagery that certain words evoke. What do I imagine when I hear certain words? And when I think about seagulls, I imagine a colony or a large group of seagulls together on a beach with the roar of the ocean. It is the definition of summer to me.
Yeah, and I have an image in my head of this angle of their wings when they are floating, when they are soaring.
Their eyes are always very striking to me, too. Like they have I'm a fan of birds, but man, do they have some mean eyes. These birds are out to get you.
Well, they're predators. They have to find their food.
They really do have predator eyes. I agree with that.
Okay, our title is Seagulls, Coastal Birds Full of Surprises. Okay, let's jump right into our article. Seagulls are one of the most widely dispersed types of birds on the planet. They can be found along the shores of every continent, even some places in Antarctica. Seagulls can drink seawater and freshwater, which means they have a lot of options for suitable habitats. Most seagulls are white or gray with black markings on their wings, but there is a lot of variation among the more than 50 species worldwide.
In many places, seagulls are considered a nuisance. That's because they live in large, noisy groups called colonies that can easily ruin a peaceful day at the beach. Seagulls are very adaptable when it comes to their diet, meaning they will eat almost anything. Tourists in coastal areas that don't keep an eye on their food may lose their meals to hungry seagulls.
Seagulls have extraordinary senses of smell and sight, which help them detect food from miles away. In addition to snatching up small sea creatures or digging through trash left by people, seagulls have a few clever tricks to find food. They will sometimes hop around on wet ground to trick worms into thinking that it is raining. Seagulls even know how to enjoy shellfish. They will drop clams and oysters from tall heights to crack open the shells.
An interesting fact about these behaviors is the way they are learned. Scientists believe that older seagulls actually teach the younger ones these tricks and pass on the knowledge from generation to generation. In seagull colonies, adults also share responsibility for taking care of the young. Young seagulls form nursery flocks where they learn essential skills before becoming adults with a few adult males watching over them. Seagulls are also known to mate for life. A pair will return to the same site each year where the female will lay her clutch of usually 3 eggs. Seagulls are truly fascinating creatures that are worth learning about.
Okay, this makes me think of bears. Why? Because when I went to Yosemite National Park, the bears often, they will smell like a candy bar wrapper in a car and pry open the door going along the rubber edge. And the mothers teach that to their children. So if you go to Yosemite, make sure there is no food or anything that smells like food in your car because the bears, they learn from a very young age how to get in.
I have heard regarding bears that they're big fans of almost anything. They can smell through canned foods. They can smell into cans.
Wow.
One thing they're not interested in, though, is kimchi.
They don't like kimchi.
Which is weird because bears like fish, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the fermented thing, but I've read stories about hunters, like in Alaska. They'll have kimchi because they know it's one of the few things that bears are not going to go for.
I will keep that in mind
if
I go
thing?
to a national park again. That's so interesting. The reason I thought of it, though, was because of this remark about the parents teaching the young seagulls how to get food.
Do you recall, as we were youths, of just the idea that animals didn't really think? They just felt like hunger, fear.
I have been told that since I was a kid, and I always knew it was hogwash.
Yeah, I suppose that there are maybe more basic creatures without maybe a wide range of emotions.
Yeah.
But I could see just through like the interactions of animals in my backyard and in my house that
Yes.
they definitely had more going on than I'm hungry or I'm afraid. Like
Absolutely.
I could just see it.
Absolutely. I read a book called The Intelligence of Every Living Thing, and the theory in this book is that all living creatures have about the same level of intelligence. It's just that for some creatures, it is mostly built in as instinct, and for other creatures, they can use more conscious thought to think things out. But in the end, because all of these living things have all managed to survive, in some sense, they have an equal measure of intelligence.
I wonder how young people view this. So we receive this as kind of given wisdom that animals don't have feelings, and we both rejected it. I wonder how young people view this. Like, think of like a middle schooler today or a high schooler today. Did they ever hear this growing up?
I still read a lot of articles that reflect that idea. Well, we always thought that. I thought, no, speak for yourself. I never thought
kidding.
that.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I didn't have a lot of pets. I did have some pets, but anybody with their eyes open, you say, just look at your yard and you know better.
Yeah. If you happen to be near YouTube when you are listening to this, tell us in the comments, what do you think about this? Hey, tell us from a Taiwanese perspective. Have you guys heard this as received wisdom, something your parents or grandparents told you that was always true, but maybe you didn't believe it?
And actually, we belie it in the way we treat our pets because you say, oh, this dog is really stupid. That means we expect a dog to be really smart.
That's true. That's true, right?
Let's go back to the beginning. So our title again is Seagulls, and there's a colon there. Coastal birds, that means birds that live and congregate close to coasts of a sea, of an ocean. Birds that are full of surprises. Now, when we see full of surprises, you're getting the reader's expectations up. So you better come through and tell us some interesting stuff or they'll be disappointed.
Yeah, it's a bird. It goes, and
yeah,
eats
exactly.
your food.
Duh.
Yeah.
All right. First paragraph. Seagulls are one of the most widely dispersed types of birds on the planet. I found that first sentence really interesting and a great opening sentence because I have visited quite a few places, like there are places I haven't been, but I visited quite a few different places, like at least in North America, Asia, and Europe. And everywhere I went, I saw seagulls. And I thought, well, this is not exotic because we've got seagulls at home. And this kind of brought together my observations. I go, oh, you find seagulls everywhere. That accounts for it.
That makes sense, too. And in fact, while there are different species of seagulls, they all basically look the same. But take a moment, look at the various species of seagulls. And like the biggest one is called, I think it's called like the big black-backed seagull. Black-backed seagull. And it looks just like a regular seagull that you and I are familiar with, except give it like a black coat. And it's really interesting. It's almost like a squirrel. It's like a squirrel is a squirrel is a squirrel.
Yeah.
But they do look a little different everywhere you go.
That's true.
They have a different color or like they're just slightly variations. And it's kind of weird to see that variation on something so familiar.
And it's true that they are very large birds in general. That bird may be especially large, but seagulls in general are large. And that, I think, is also related to Chris's comment on the eyes. They're just so large, it's like they're kind of in your face.
They really are, yeah. They're looking at you.
Okay, next sentence. They can be found along the shores of every continent, even some places in Antarctica. And that part of the sentence is really important at the end because very often when people say, oh, they're found in all of the continents, what you usually find after that is except Antarctica. But here, they are found even in Antarctica. So that's an important bit of information. And that means they are very adaptable because it gets awfully cold there. Seagulls can drink seawater and fresh water, which means they have a lot of options for suitable habitats. I find this sentence also very informative because a lot of sea creatures, they can only survive in seawater or only survive in fresh water. But if you've got some animal that lives by the sea and does fine on both, that is really worth noting.
Now, seagulls are also interesting in the fact that they can drink seawater and freshwater. Most seabirds can't drink seawater. They still need to find sources of fresh water. But seagulls can do both. They can secrete. That means kind of to lose it out of their eye drop. So we know
that's how they do it.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
We have salty tears just like they do, but they're really good at processing it. And so seagulls actually use this to their advantage and find birds that need to find fresh water. And when, like, for example, pelicans, a pelican needs to drain its big mouth pouch before it can swallow the fish because it can't process the seawater.
That's so interesting.
So a seagull will pay attention. The pelican opens its mouth. The seagull will fly into the pelican's mouth, steal the fish, and fly away.
Because it's a time when it's vulnerable, it has to open its mouth wide.
What ridiculous animals.
Smart. Okay. Most seagulls are white or gray with black markings on their wings, but there is a lot of variation among the more than 50 species worldwide. And I did notice that, although they were clearly seagulls, no matter what country I was in, they did look a little different due to their markings.
The smallest seagull in the world looks quite different than what we think of as a seagull. It's very adorable. I guarantee you, if you see what the smallest seagull looks like, you're going to let out a big awe. No, it's like, it melts the heart.
Okay.
All right, let's go to our second paragraph. In many places, seagulls are considered a nuisance.
A nuisance is something that is always in your way. It bothers you. You wish that thing were not in your life.
Cockroaches are nuisances.
Oh, they're worse than that. But yes, that's one.
So we might also call it a pest. I would say a nuisance is a little bit bigger of a problem than a pest.
Yeah, they're both things you don't want to be bothered with.
Let's continue. That's because they live in large, noisy groups called colonies that can easily ruin a peaceful day at the beach.
And we really value our silence, and we don't want it broken by a bunch of creatures who are making a lot of trouble for us.
So seagulls have a very nasty reputation. Part of it because of them stealing food, but really, doesn't that mean they're just really clever?
Yeah.
You need to be pretty good at what you're doing in order to steal.
Like corvids, like crows and ravens, and the same kind of thing.
Right. Now, when we talk about a colony, it reminds me generally of the word of flock, F-L-O-C-K, which is just a group of birds. And this brings me to the famous saying that birds of a feather flock together. When we have the same kinds of people, the same kinds of whatever, they're often going to be found in groups. This is a cliche statement, but it is one that is worth knowing. Birds of a feather flock together. However, because this is always the nature of English, we have an opposite and equally true saying, opposites attract.
Opposites attract. That's true, too. And so people have written a lot of articles on, they're trying to resolve the contradiction in those two ideas. But there's this thing about birds of a feather flock together really hits me when Facebook suggests friends for me.
Yeah.
I'll look at all these people I have never seen before, never heard of, and they'll say 3 friends in common, 57 friends in common, 18 friends in common. I will click on it. I want to know, who do I know that knows this person and which group of my friends? Because my friends are divided into several groups. Some are mostly in America. Some are mostly scholars. Some are my family. Some are friends from kindergarten, and some are former students. So which group are you in? And that is really interesting because often if you're in this group, it's a whole bunch of people with a similar personality. For example, there are some people among my friends who are very mischievous. They're always kind of making goofy jokes and saying things to kind of...
me?
No. They're just going to say something to try and be provocative. And usually it's the same group of people that are their friends. So I can kind of guess what their personality is probably like.
You know, it's odd that you bring this up because not 2 days ago, I was talking with someone on Facebook and I clicked onto their profile to send them a message and I saw that you were also their friend. And I was like, that's funny. How did we not know? I'm trying to think who it was.
Oh, you'll have to remember and tell me later. I'm curious because it's fascinating because they really do divide
These
your
social
friends
circles, right?
Into groups of the mischievous ones, the really the studiers, the business people. You'll find these distinct groups and you think, that person is probably like this group of people.
Okay, let's continue to our next sentence here. Seagulls are very adaptable when it comes to their diet, meaning they will eat almost anything.
Now, that's another point on which they're like cockroaches.
Yeah, I suppose so.
That is really an advantage, I think, evolutionarily. So if you can eat anything, you can adapt to many places.
Yeah, seagulls will eat living things. They'll eat dead things. They'll eat
Yuck.
birds. They'll
Garbage.
they'll eat literally garbage. They'll eat almost anything. Seagulls, this is quite the statement to say they will eat almost anything.
Yeah, and I bet that really gives them a big advantage.
Let's continue. Tourists in coastal areas that don't keep an eye on their food may lose their meals to hungry seagulls.
Have you ever seen that happen?
Yeah. I think it's really famous in New Jersey, like on the shore there near Atlantic City, where people will raise their food and the seagulls will come snatch it out of your hands.
Yeah.
And so we've inured these birds. We've encouraged this behavior.
Because we think it's so cute.
And then people get mad when it happens, when we're not actively trying to feed them and the birds will come steal your food.
And they lost the whole hamburger.
I think that's so unfair personally. I think that people have kind of trained seagulls that this is okay. And then when seagulls do it, they get mad. So personally, I get frustrated when I see people get mad if seagulls stealing food. I'm like, well, you shouldn't raise your hamburger in the sky. Like, what were you thinking?
I'm thinking of an internet meme that I think was of people standing in line to order their food, and there was a seagull standing behind the people.
There's one of my favorite all-time videos on the internet is a seagull running into like a 7-Eleven, grabbing a bag of like Doritos and trying to run out, but the doors have closed behind him, and the bird just starts butting up against the glass door trying to activate it. And so, like, this guy walks by. He sees this bird, like, freaking out. And so he activates the door.
Yeah.
And the bird runs out. And he okay, you got it, bird, go. And another woman tries to take the chips from the bird.
Yeah.
And the bird starts flying away. And the man starts yelling at the woman. It's just this bizarre confluence of like, events of, like, this bird learned to steal the Doritos, so the man helps him out. But the woman says you can't steal the chips. And so they start arguing. What a
hilarious.
Bizarre situation.
Getting all worked up over a seagull's
Over
behavior.
the seagull eating some Doritos. What a silly thing.
Okay, on to the next paragraph. Seagulls have extraordinary senses of smell and sight, which help them detect food from miles away. Now, this sentence is a good sentence, except for, I don't know about you, but when I saw senses of, I was thrown off a little bit because I was expecting have an extraordinary sense of smell or something. Because it was two senses, they had to make it plural. But the phrase or the sentence still struck me as a little odd. It's perfectly correct, but usually we just talk about one sense at a time. So just keep that in mind. I would probably say seagulls have an extraordinary sense of smell and also of sight. I would solve it that way.
I agree. I think that's a very nice way of turning the phrase, because we do like to say a sense of whatever, singular. One thing that caught me in this sentence was miles. Because this is a metric country, I try to avoid that.
Use kilometers.
I have a lot of American friends that think I am ridiculous for using the metric system, but we're in a metric country. Like, of course you should learn Celsius. Of course you should try to use kilometers. It's harder for us because we're not used to them, but you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, I suppose.
If you are in absolutely any country outside the U.S., you're using kilometers. It's the vast majority of the globe.
I got some people real angry at me by saying that, although, like I said, I'm competent at the metric system, and I like Celsius, but I still mentally prefer Fahrenheit for my day-to-day, and boy, did that make some people angry.
I wanted to ask the country, but maybe I shouldn't.
Well, we'll just say it's close to the United States. And we share a lot of similarities. All right.
Somebody has a little feeling of insecurity, I'm afraid. Okay, let's continue. In addition to snatching up small sea creatures or digging through trash left by people, seagulls have a few clever tricks to find food.
So when we snatch something, we quickly grab, usually with a lot of force.
Yeah, we're afraid that somebody else is going to get it first. They will sometimes hop around on wet ground to trick worms into thinking that it is raining. I found that fascinating.
I agree. This was so delightful. The mental imagery, I was just overjoyed reading this.
Because it reminds me of whenever I'm on a hike, I know that after a rain, that's exactly what happens with the worms. And also the dragonflies start flying around when it feels like it's going to rain. So that's very clever.
If you find a big worm stuck in a puddle, do you rescue it or just let it go?
No.
Really?
I just ignore it. It's none of my business. I learned that from a book that said, you should just not interfere.
Really? My wife is a big fan of having me pick up the worms and put them in the ground.
In this book that I read, it was actually by Carlos Castaneda, they said that you may be putting them right in the way of another predator, or maybe a car. So just leave it.
Well, that's why I usually put it like in the mud where a car's not going to drive. But yeah.
It may be a farm vehicle, or who knows what's coming by.
in my neighborhood. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
This is like when I'm walking home. Yeah.
Somebody may just walk on it.
Point taken. Point taken. But if it's in a puddle and it's going to die, I'm going to put it in the mud.
Okay, gotcha. Next sentence. Seagulls even know how to enjoy shellfish. They will drop clams and oysters from tall heights to crack open the shells. And that is very clever. Some birds do that with nuts as well.
That's right. Aeschylus, the famous Greek playwright, was actually killed this way when a hawk dropped a turtle onto his head. That's right. He had a shiny head. He had a shiny bald head, like almost like a stereotypical bald head. And it was very shiny, and he kept it shiny. And apparently birds, when they see that very shiny thing from high up, it makes them think of a rock. And so the hawk dropped this turtle right onto his noggin. And so this is something that many birds can do. What an interesting thing.
That's so interesting. Look up this playwright. He was brilliant. Okay, our last paragraph.
An interesting fact about these behaviors is the way they are learned.
Yeah, so we talked about that earlier. Let's keep going.
Scientists believe that older seagulls actually teach the younger ones these tricks and pass on the knowledge from generation to generation.
And we've already discussed that. They're not the only ones. A lot of animals do this, like we mentioned bears earlier.
In seagull colonies, adults also share responsibility for taking care of the young.
Let's keep going on this one. The good part is coming.
Young seagulls form nursery flocks where they learn essential skills before becoming adults, with a few males watching over them.
That's the good part. So the men are teaching in the nursery schools and kindergartens, and that's really great. And I want to mention that kindergarten is not the same as the word you use in Chinese for it. It only means the oldest class. You have a little class, a middle class, an old class. It is only the highest level of nursery school in Taiwan. That is called kindergarten in the U.S. So make sure you pay attention to that.
Let's continue. Seagulls are also known to mate for life.
And that's another thing especially women like to see.
This is true. They rarely divorce. Let's continue. A pair will return to the same site each year where the female will lay her clutch of usually 3 eggs.
And that's a counting word for eggs. So if it is a bunch of eggs laid at once, we call that a clutch of eggs. And I think women will think that is so sweet.
Seagulls are truly fascinating creatures that are worth learning about.
Okay, we have a few questions for you. Number 1, according to the passage, which of the following is true about seagulls?
They are only found in southern continents.
They're found all around the world, and make sure that you don't say southern. It's
Here.
Southern, southern. Pay attention. B, they can only eat food from the ocean.
Not true. C, they are quiet, peaceful creatures.
Absolutely
Very wrong.
Not. D, they are loyal to their spouse. We love that. The answer is D. Number 2.
What does the word nuisance in the second paragraph most likely mean?
A, annoyance. How about if we stop there? That's the answer. So let's move on to number 3. Sophia, a bird expert, is observing seagulls at a beach. Which of the following is least likely to happen during her observation?
A, some seagulls are making loud noises.
That's very likely. B, some tourist food is being taken away by seagulls.
That's
Also
very likely. C, a seagull is using a hard surface to break open a seashell.
That's really quite likely. That leaves D, which is the correct answer. A seagull is kicking a stone to lure worms out. No, they're actually just kind of stamping on the ground.
Number 4, which of the following best describes a nursery flock of seagulls?
A, where the males help hatch the eggs.
No, that's not right. Letter B, where the seagulls look for their mates.
No. C, where the young learn survival skills from the old. And that is the correct answer. We're done for today. Tune in next time. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.